The phone rang at 3:17 a.m. A shrill sound cutting through the quiet of my small Brooklyn apartment. I fumbled in the dark, heart already racing, knowing calls at this hour never brought good news. The screen glowed with an unknown number. A foreign country code, +39. Italy. My stomach dropped. Hello. My voice was hoarse, barely awake. Aunt Clara. It's Lila. Her voice trembled, thin and fragile, like glass about to crack. My niece, only 16, wasn't supposed to be calling me from halfway across the world. She was supposed to be with my parents, her grandparents, on their cultural enrichment trip to Rome. A trip I'd reluctantly agreed to, thinking it would be good for her a chance to see the world, to escape the chaos of her fractured home life. Lila, what's wrong? Where are you? I sat up, clutching the phone, already dreading her answer. Don't know exactly, she whispered. I'm in Rome, at some train station. They're gone. Aunt Clara, Grandma and Grandpa, they left me. Left you? My mind reeled, trying to process. What do you mean? Left you? They got mad at me. We had a fight, and they said I was ungrateful, that I was ruining their trip. They took my passport and they left me at the hotel. I tried to find them, but I couldn't. I don't know where they went. Her words spilled out in a rush, punctuated by quiet sobs. I've been wandering for hours. I don't know what to do. I gripped the edge of my bed, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My parents, Lila's grandparents, had abandoned her. In a foreign country. The thought was so absurd, so cruel. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. But Lila's voice, raw and terrified, was real. Too real. Stay where you are, I said, forcing calm into my voice. Tell me everything you see. Are there signs? People? Anything that can help me find you? She described a busy train station termini. She thought full of late-night travelers, neon signs in Italian, and a clock tower glowing against the night sky. She was alone, sitting on a bench with her backpack, her only lifeline. No money, no passport, no phone charger. Just a scared kid in a city she didn't know. Stay put, Lila. I'm coming for you. I promise. I hung up, my hands shaking as I dialed the U.S. Embassy in Rome. My parents had always been selfish, always put their own desires above everyone else's. But this was a new low, even for them. The embassy line was slow, bureaucratic, but I finally got through to someone who promised to send local authorities to Termini Station. I gave them Lila's description, 5'2", brown curly hair, wearing a blue hoodie and jeans, carrying a red backpack. They told me to stay calm, to wait for updates. Wait. My niece was alone in a foreign city, and my parents, her supposed guardians, had discarded her like trash. I booked the next flight to Rome, my fingers fumbling over the keyboard as I tried to hold back the rage bubbling inside me. My parents had been reckless with Lila's life before, but I'd always stepped in, always cleaned up their messes. When Lila's mommy's sister died 5 years ago, and her dad spiraled into addiction, I became her anchor. I fought for custody, but my parents, with their money and charm, convinced the courts they were better suited. I should have fought harder. I should have known they'd fail her. As the plane took off hours later, I stared out the window, the dark Atlantic stretching endlessly below. My mind churned with memories of my parents' negligence, missed birthdays, forgotten promises, their endless pursuit of their own pleasures. They'd always seen Lila as a burden, a reminder of their daughter's death, a weight they didn't want to carry. But abandoning her in Rome, that was a betrayal I couldn't forgive. The flight was torture, each minute stretching into eternity. I kept picturing Lila, small and scared, alone in that massive station. What if she'd been hurt? What if she'd trusted the wrong person? The embassy called mid-flight, confirming they'd found her at Termini. Safe but shaken. They were holding her at a police station until I arrived. Relief flooded me, but it was quickly drowned by fury. My parents had done this. They'd left a child in every way that mattered in a foreign city with nothing. When I landed in Rome, the city was a blur of ancient stone and modern chaos. I took a taxi straight to the police station, my heart pounding as I scanned the crowded streets for any sign of Lila. The officer at the desk led me to a small room where she sat, curled in a chair, her eyes red and hollow. She looked so young, so fragile, like the little girl I'd once rocked to sleep after her mom's funeral. Aunt Clara. She threw herself into my arms, sobbing, her thin frame shaking against me. I held her tight, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep, that everything would be okay, that I'd never let her go again. The police explained what they knew. Lila had been alone for nearly 24 hours. My parents had checked out of their hotel, leaving no trace, no note, nothing. Their phones were off, their whereabouts unknown. Lila said they'd argued about her wanting to call me, about her missing home. My mother had screamed that she was done with her, that she wasn't their responsibility. Then they'd taken her passport and left. I thanked the officers, my voice tight, and took Lila to a nearby hotel. She clung to me, barely speaking, her trust in the world shattered. As she slept, I sat by her bed, my mind racing. My parents couldn't just walk away from this. They'd crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them disappear into their charmed, selfish lives. I called Interpol the next morning. If my parents thought they could abandon a minor in a foreign country and face no consequences, they were wrong. I gave the authorities everything: names, last known locations, even their frequent travel patterns. The embassy was already involved, and I wasn't going to stop until justice caught up with them. Lila deserved better. She deserved a family who wouldn't throw her away. As I watched her sleep, her face finally peaceful, I made a vow. I'd fight for her, no matter what it took. My parents had made their choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. The next morning, Rome woke with a golden glow, sunlight spilling over the ancient rooftops. But the warmth couldn't touch the cold knot in my chest. Lila was still asleep, her breathing soft but uneven, as if even in dreams she couldn't escape the fear of the past day. I sat by the hotel window, clutching a cup of bitter espresso, my eyes tracing the cobblestone streets below. Somewhere out there, my parents were living their lives, oblivious to the wreckage they'd left behind. I'd spent the night piecing together what I knew. My parents, Margaret and Richard, had always been nomads, chasing their whims across continents. They'd sold their Manhattan penthouse years ago, trading stability for a life of luxury. Travel Paris in spring, Tokyo in fall, always somewhere new, always untethered. When they took custody of Lila, I thought it might ground them, give them purpose. Instead, they treated her like an accessory, dragging her to their destinations without ever considering her needs. The embassy called at 8 a.m. Their tone clipped but professional. They'd contacted Italian authorities, and Interpol was now tracking my parents' movements. No one could confirm their exact location, but their credit cards showed recent charges in Florence, just a few hours north. The thought of them sipping wine in some Tuscan villa while Lila had been stranded made my blood boil. Lila stirred, blinking awake, her eyes puffy but sharper than the night before. "Are they coming back?" she asked, her voice small. I knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her face. "I don't know," Sweetheart. But you're with me now. You're safe. She nodded, but her gaze drifted to the floor. Her shoulders hunched. They said I was too much trouble. She whispered. That I didn't appreciate them. But I just wanted to call you. I missed you. Her words hit like a punch. I pulled her into a hug, fighting back tears. You're not trouble, Lila. You're perfect. They're the ones who failed you. We spent the day at the hotel, waiting for updates. I tried to keep Lila distracted ordering room service, playing cards, telling her stories about her mom when we were kids. But her smiles were fleeting, her eyes always searching, as if she expected my parents to walk through the door and apologize. I knew better. Margaret and Richard didn't apologize. They justified, deflected, moved on. By afternoon, an Interpol officer named Sophia contacted me. She was kind but direct, explaining that abandoning a minor in a foreign country was a serious offense. They'd issued a lookout notice for my parents, and the U.S. Embassy was coordinating with Italian police to locate them. Sophia asked for any details that might help: habits, favorite places, anything. I told her about their love for high-end hotels, their obsession with art galleries, their habit of posting cryptic updates on social media about their adventures. She promised to follow every lead. Lila overheard the call, her face pale. Are they going to jail? She asked when I hung up. I hesitated. Part of me wanted them to suffer, to face the full weight of their actions. But Lila was still their granddaughter, still tied to them by blood and memory. I don't know, I admitted. But they can't just walk away from this. What they did was wrong. She nodded, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. She loved them, despite everything. That was the hardest part, knowing they'd hurt her. Yet she still carried that love, like a wound she couldn't close. We ventured out that evening, needing air, needing to feel like the world wasn't collapsing. Rome was alive, its streets buzzing with tourists and locals, the air thick with the scent of espresso and fresh bread. Lila clung to my hand as we walked past the Colosseum, its ancient stones glowing under floodlights. For a moment, she seemed lighter, her eyes wide with wonder at the city's beauty. I wished I could freeze that moment, shield her from the pain waiting back at the hotel. But reality intruded. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia, a sighting of my parents at a gallery in Florence, confirmed by security footage. They were laughing, carefree, as if they hadn't left a child to fend for herself. I showed Lila a photo of the gallery, hoping it might jog her memory of their plans. But she just shook her head. They didn't tell me anything, she said. They never do. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Lila's words, her fear, her abandonment. My parents had always been distant, but I'd never imagined they'd stoop this low. I thought of my sister, Lila's mom, and the promises I'd made at her funeral to protect Lila, to give her the family she deserved. I'd failed her then, letting my parents take her. I wouldn't fail her now. I contacted a lawyer in New York, starting the process to revoke my parents' custody. It would be a fight. They had money, connections, a knack for spinning stories in their favor. But I had something they didn't: love for Lila, fierce and unyielding. I'd do whatever it took to bring her home, to give her the stability she'd been denied. As dawn broke over Rome, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made another call to Interpol. I wasn't just fighting for Lila anymore. I was fighting for justice, for accountability, for the girl who deserved to know she was worth more than my parents' selfishness. The days in Rome blurred into a tense rhythm of waiting and action. Lila and I settled into a fragile routine at the hotel, balancing moments of normalcy with the weight of what had happened. I tried to keep her spirits up, taking her to small cafes, pointing out street artists, teaching her Italian phrases. She'd laugh sometimes, a fleeting sound that gave me hope. But her eyes still held a shadow, a quiet fear that lingered. Interpol and the embassy were moving faster now. Sophia called daily with updates. My parents had been spotted again, this time at a luxury hotel in Venice. They'd checked in under their own names, brazen or careless. I couldn't tell. The police were closing in, but my parents were slippery, always one step ahead, their wealth and charm opening doors most couldn't access. I didn't tell Lila everything. She didn't need to know how close the authorities were, or how my parents' social media posts vague, artsy shots of Venetian canals felt like a taunt. Instead, I focused on her, on rebuilding the trust they'd shattered. We talked about her dreams, her love for painting, her hope to study art one day. She showed me sketches in her notebook, vivid drawings of Rome's fountains and ruins, each line infused with emotion. It was her way of coping, of making sense of the chaos. One afternoon, as we sat in a quiet piazza eating gelato, Lila asked the question I'd been dreading. Why do they hate me? My heart sank. I set down my spoon, searching for words that wouldn't deepen her pain. They don't hate you, Lila. They're broken. They've always been more in love with their own lives than with anyone else's. That's not your fault. It's never been your fault. She stared at her gelato, swirling it into a melted mess. I just wanted them to love me, she said, her voice barely audible. I tried so hard to be what they wanted. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. You don't have to try to be anything. You're enough, just as you are. And I love you. Always will. She gave me a small, sad smile, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of belief in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. That evening, Sophia called with news. My parents had been detained in Venice. They'd been at a private art auction, mingling with collectors. When the police moved in, they hadn't resisted, but they'd demanded their lawyer, spinning a story about a misunderstanding. I could imagine my mother's icy indignation, my father's smooth excuses. They'd always been good at playing innocent. The embassy arranged for Lila to speak to a counselor, someone trained to help kids process trauma. I sat outside the room, listening to the muffled sound of her voice, wishing I could shield her from reliving the pain. When she came out, her eyes were red but her shoulders straighter, as if talking had lightened her burden. Even just a little. They're going to question Grandma and Grandpa, she said, sitting beside me. What happens if they say it was my fault? They can say whatever they want, I replied, my voice firm. The truth is on your side. You were alone, without your passport, in a foreign country. That's not your fault. It's theirs. She nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering. My parents had a way of twisting reality, making others question themselves. I'd grown up under that spell, always second-guessing, always trying to please them. I wouldn't let Lila fall into that trap. The next day, I met with Sophia at the police station. She showed me photos of my parents in custody, mother's face tight with fury, my father's expression calm, almost bored. They'd claimed Lila had run away, that they'd been searching for her. But the evidence told a different story. Hotel records showed they'd checked out before Lila was left behind, and their phones showed no calls to the police or the embassy. They'd lied, and the authorities knew it. Sophia explained the charges: child abandonment, endangerment, theft of Lila's passport. The case would likely move to an international court, given the cross-border nature of the crime. My parents' wealth might delay justice, but it wouldn't stop it. I felt a grim satisfaction, but also a pang of sadness. They were my parents, after all, but they'd chosen this path. Back at the hotel, I told Lila the basics just enough to reassure her that the truth was coming to light. She listened quietly, then asked, "Can we go home soon?" "Soon," I promised. "But first, we need to make sure everything's settled here. And I want to show you more of Rome. Not their version ours." For the first time, her smile reached her eyes. "I'd like that." We spent the next few days exploring Rome on our terms, wandering through the Pantheon, sketching by the Trevi Fountain, eating pizza in tucked-away trattorias. Lila's laughter grew easier, her steps lighter. But I knew the road ahead would be long. The legal battle was just beginning, and my parents wouldn't go down without a fight. Still, I was ready. For Lila, I'd face anything. The legal wheels were turning, but they moved slowly, grinding against the weight of my parents' influence. Interpol had transferred them to a holding facility in Rome, pending a hearing. The embassy assured me that Lila's case was airtight, but my parents' lawyer was already spinning a narrative of a troubled teen who'd misunderstood their intentions. It made my skin crawl, the way they twisted their cruelty into a story that painted them as victims. Lila and I stayed in Rome, caught in a strange limbo. The city was beautiful, vibrant, but it felt like a stage for our private drama. I kept Lila close, shielding her from the legal details while trying to give her moments of joy. We visited the Villa Borghese, where she sketched statues in the gardens, her pencil moving with a focus that felt like healing. But at night, when she thought I was asleep, I'd hear her crying softly, her pain spilling out in the dark. One morning, Sophia called with a request. The authorities wanted Lila to give a formal statement. It would be recorded, used as evidence in the case against my parents. I hated the idea of putting her through it, but Sophia insisted it was crucial. Lila deserved to have her voice heard, to tell her truth. I sat with her as she prepared, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked, her voice small. "They will," I said, squeezing her hand. "You're telling the truth. That's all that matters." The interview was held at a quiet office near the embassy, with a kind translator and a child advocate present. Lila recounted everything: the argument, my parents' anger, the moment they took her passport and left her at the hotel. Her voice broke as she described wandering Rome alone, scared and lost, with no money or way to reach me. I sat outside, listening through a one-way window, my heart breaking with every word. When she finished, the advocate praised her courage, but Lila just looked exhausted, her eyes dull. I took her for ice cream after, trying to bring back some lightness. But she was quiet, her thoughts far away. I wondered if I was doing enough, if I could ever help her heal from this betrayal. That evening, I got a call from my parents' lawyer, a slick man named Victor who spoke with the confidence of someone used to winning. He offered a deal. If I dropped the charges, my parents would relinquish custody of Lila without a fight. They'd even pay for her education, he said, as a gesture of goodwill. I laughed bitterly, hanging up without a response. They thought they could buy their way out of this, just like they'd bought their way through life. Not this time. I contacted my lawyer in New York, pushing forward with the custody case. The evidence was mounting: Lila's statement, hotel records, witness accounts from the train station. My parents' story was unraveling, their lies exposed. But I knew they'd fight dirty. They always had. A few days later, Sophia arranged for me to confront my parents at the holding facility. I wasn't sure I wanted to see them, but something in me needed answers, needed to look them in the eyes and ask why. Lila stayed with a counselor, sketching in a quiet room, while I went to face the people who'd raised me and failed us both. The room was stark, gray, with a metal table between us. My mother sat rigid, her face a mask of indignation. My father looked weary, his charm dulled by the fluorescent lights. They didn't apologize. Instead, my mother launched into a tirade about Lila's behavior, how she'd been impossible to manage. "She's a child," I snapped, my voice shaking with rage. "You left her alone in a foreign country. You took her passport. What were you thinking?" My father shrugged, his voice calm. "We thought she'd find her way. She's resourceful." I stared at them, stunned. They didn't see her as a person, only as an inconvenience. I stood, my hands trembling. "You don't get to walk away from this. Not anymore." As I left, my mother called after me, her voice sharp. "You're making a mistake, Clara. You'll regret this." I didn't turn back. Their words meant nothing now. They'd lost any claim to my loyalty, to Lila's love. All that mattered was getting her home, building a life where she felt safe and wanted. Back at the hotel, Lila was waiting, her sketchbook open to a drawing of the two of us, standing together in a field of flowers. It was simple, hopeful, a glimpse of the future she wanted. I hugged her, promising we'd make that future real. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I knew it would be grueling, but I was ready to fight for Lila, for justice, for the family we'd build together. My parents had made their choice. Now, it was time for the world to see who they really were. The hearing loomed like a storm on the horizon, its weight pressing down on both Lila and me. We spent the days leading up to it in a delicate balance, trying to hold onto the small joys we'd found in Rome while bracing for the battle ahead. Lila was stronger now, her laughter a little brighter, but I could still see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty of what the future held. The courtroom was small but imposing, with high ceilings and walls lined with stern portraits of judges past. Lila sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly, her sketchbook tucked in her bag for comfort. My parents sat across the room, flanked by their lawyer, their faces composed but distant. They didn't look at Lila, didn't acknowledge her. It was as if she didn't exist. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, listened as the prosecutor laid out the case. Lila's statement was read aloud, her words echoing through the room, raw and unfiltered. She'd been abandoned, left without resources in a foreign city, her passport taken by the very people meant to protect her. Hotel records, security footage, and witness statements corroborated her story. My parents' defense that Lila had run away, that they'd been searching for her, crumbled under scrutiny. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I told the court about Lila's life, her mother's death, her father's absence, the way my parents had taken her in only to neglect her. I spoke of her courage, her talent, the way she'd survived those terrifying hours alone in Rome. I looked at my parents as I spoke, hoping to see some flicker of remorse, but their faces were stone. Lila didn't have to testify in person, thank God, but her recorded statement was enough. The judge's expression softened as she listened, her eyes flicking to Lila, who sat with her head bowed, clutching my hand under the table. My parents' lawyer tried to paint a different picture: Lila as a rebellious teen, my parents as overwhelmed guardians who'd made a mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the judge wasn't swayed. She adjourned the hearing, promising a ruling soon. But the look in her eyes told me she saw the truth. Afterward, Lila and I walked through Rome's streets, the weight of the day still heavy on us. We stopped at a small fountain, tossing coins into the water, a quiet ritual of hope. "What did you wish for?" I asked. Lila smiled, a real smile this time. "To stay with you." My heart swelled. You don't need a wish for that. It's already true. The ruling came 2 days later. My parents were found guilty of child abandonment and endangerment. They faced fines and potential jail time, though their lawyer was already appealing. More importantly, their custody of Lila was revoked, and I was granted temporary guardianship, pending a full hearing in New York. It was a victory, but it felt bittersweet. I'd wanted justice, but I also mourned the parents I'd once hoped they could be. We prepared to leave Rome, packing our bags with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Lila was quieter now, processing everything, but she held my hand as we boarded the plane, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy legal battles. Therapy, rebuilding her trust, but I was ready. For her, I'd face anything. As the plane lifted off, Rome shrinking below us, Lila leaned against me, her voice soft. I'm glad it was you who came for me. I kissed her forehead, tears stinging my eyes. Always. Lila. Always. Back in New York, we settled into my apartment, turning it into a home for two. Lila's sketches covered the walls, bursts of color and life. The custody hearing was scheduled, and I was prepared to fight for permanent guardianship. My parents were out of our lives, their choices a shadow we'd leave behind. Lila started school again, her art teacher praising her talent, her friends rallying around her. She was healing, slowly, finding her place in the world. And I was finding mine. To as her guardian, her family, her home. The New York autumn was crisp, the leaves turning gold and red, a stark contrast to Rome's eternal summer. Lila and I had been back for a month, settling into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. My apartment, once a quiet refuge for one, now buzzed with Lila's energy, her laughter, her music, her sketches scattered across every surface. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The custody hearing was a quiet affair, a stark contrast to the drama in Rome. My parents didn't show, their lawyers citing travel complications. It didn't matter. The judge reviewed the evidence, listened to my case, and granted me permanent guardianship. Lila was officially mine, not just my niece, but my daughter in every way that mattered. When I told her, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, her tears soaking my shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. You don't need to thank me, I said, my voice thick. You're my family. Life wasn't without challenges. Lila still had nightmares, waking up gasping, haunted by those hours alone in Rome. We found a therapist who specialized in trauma, someone who helped Lila unpack the pain and begin to heal. I went to a few sessions, too, grappling with my own guilt. Why hadn't I fought harder for her sooner? Why had I trusted my parents? The therapist helped me see that I couldn't change the past, only the future. And that future was Lila's. She thrived in school, her art becoming a bridge to new friends, new dreams. Her teacher connected her with a local gallery, where one of her sketches, a vibrant scene of the Trevi Fountain, was displayed in a student showcase. I stood beside her at the opening, watching her beam as strangers praised her work. She was finding her voice, her strength, and I couldn't have been prouder. My parents faded into the background, their appeal dragging through the courts. Interpol kept tabs on them, but I didn't care where they were anymore. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. I blocked their numbers, deleted their emails, built a wall between us and their chaos. Lila didn't ask about them, and I didn't push. If she wanted to talk, I'd be there. For now, she seemed content to let them go. One evening, as we sat on the fire escape watching the city lights, Lila handed me a new sketch. It was us, standing together in a field of flowers, just like the one she'd drawn in Rome. But this time, the colors were brighter, the lines bolder, our faces filled with hope. "I want to be an artist," she said, her voice steady. "Not just for me, but for Mom. She always said I could paint the world." I smiled, my heart full. "You already are." We talked late into the night. About her dreams, her fears, the life we'd build together. I told her about my own hope to give her stability, love, a home where she'd never feel abandoned again. She listened, her eyes bright, and for the first time, I saw no trace of fear in them. The road ahead would have its bumps: school, therapy, the lingering shadows of Rome. But we'd face them together. Lila wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter, a dreamer, a light that no betrayal could dim. And I was her family, her anchor, her home. As the city hummed below us, I made a silent promise to my sister, to Lila, to myself. I'd never let her down. Not now. Not ever. The world could be cruel, but it could also be beautiful. And I'd make sure Lila saw that beauty every single day.